Nihilism means the belief that life has no inherent meaning, purpose, or value. The word nihilism comes from the Latin word nihil, which means nothing. This shows that the central idea of nihilism is nothingness, or the belief that there is no final truth, purpose, or inherent structure to the universe or to human life. In simple words, nihilism is the view that nothing really has ultimate importance. The idea of nihilism developed slowly over time in European philosophy between the late 18th century and the 19th century. This period was marked by major cultural, religious, and scientific changes. Before that time, most people in Europe believed that religion, especially Christianity, gave life meaning and moral direction. People believed that life had a clear purpose and that the world was created by God who also gave moral laws. However, after the Enlightenment, which began in the late 1600s and continued through the 1700s, many philosophers and scientists started to question old religious explanations of the world. The Enlightenment encouraged people to use reason, logic, and science instead of faith or tradition. When people began to apply scientific thinking to every part of life, many traditional religious beliefs and moral rules started to lose authority. Out of this cultural shift grew the idea that perhaps there is no absolute truth or divine order, which later became known as nihilism. The first known use of the term nihilism in a philosophical context was by the German philosopher Friedrich Heinrich Jacobi, in 1799. Jacobi used the term to criticize another German philosopher, Johann Gottlieb Fichte, who was part of the German idealist movement. Jacobi claimed that Fichte's philosophy reduced everything to the thinking subject, meaning that it made the external world depend entirely on human thought. Jacobi said that if everything depends only on the mind, then real objective existence disappears, and this leads to nihilism, or the belief in nothing real outside the mind. So, in this early use, nihilism meant a kind of extreme subjectivism, where reality itself is denied. In the 19th century, the word nihilism became much more famous in Russia because of literature and politics. The Russian novelist, Ivan Turgenev, made the term widely known through his novel, Fathers and Sons, published in 1862. In the story, one of the main characters, Yevgeny Bazarov, is called a nihilist. Bazarov rejects all authority, religion, social customs, and traditional morality. He only believes in scientific facts and reason. When Turgenev introduced this character, the word nihilist became part of Russian popular culture. Many young intellectuals in Russia started to call themselves nihilists as a form of rebellion against the rigid, conservative, and religious social system of the Russian Empire under Tsar Alexander II. For them, to be a nihilist meant to reject everything old and unproven, including faith, monarchy, and social hierarchy, and to replace it with science, logic, and equality. The philosopher most famously linked with nihilism is Friedrich Nietzsche, who lived from 1844 to 1900. Nietzsche wrote about nihilism mainly in his books The Gay Science and Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Nietzsche used the concept of nihilism to describe a deep cultural crisis in Europe. He said that for centuries, Western civilization was built on belief in God, in moral absolutes, and in the idea that life has a divine purpose. When people gradually lost faith in these things because of science, secularism, and modern philosophy, they destroyed the foundation that had given life meaning. Nietzsche called this the moment when God is dead. He did not mean that God had literally died, but that belief in God had lost its power and influence. This created a vacuum, a situation in which people could no longer rely on religion or traditional morality to tell them what is right, wrong, or meaningful. Nietzsche warned that if people did not create new values to replace the old ones, society would fall into despair and confusion. He called the process of building new values the revaluation of all values. He said that humans must learn to give meaning to life themselves instead of depending on inherited religious or moral systems. There are several specific types of nihilism, each focusing on a different area of life or knowledge. First, existential nihilism. Existential nihilism is the belief that life itself has no inherent purpose or ultimate meaning. According to this view, the universe does not have a goal, and human existence is not directed toward any higher reason. This is the most common form of nihilism people refer to. Second, moral nihilism. Moral nihilism means that there are no objective moral truths or absolute standards of good and evil. In other words, morality is created by humans, not discovered in nature or given by a god, and therefore can change across time and cultures. Third, epistemological nihilism. Epistemological nihilism questions the possibility of knowing anything with certainty. It says that human knowledge is always limited, uncertain, or possibly false, so absolute truth can never be known. Fourth, political nihilism. Political nihilism rejects all forms of political authority, hierarchy, and social order. It became an important idea in 19th-century Russia, where some radical revolutionaries believed that the old system must be completely destroyed before a new just society could be created. These Russian political nihilists were influenced by works like What is to be Done, written by Nikolai Chernyshevsky in 1863, which promoted rational egoism and the creation of a new type of revolutionary human being, and The Catechism of a Revolutionary, written by Sergei Nechayev in 1869, which described the moral code of a revolutionary who must give up everything for the cause, including personal emotions, relationships, and morality. In the 20th century, existentialist philosophers such as Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus discussed nihilism in new ways. Sartre accepted that life has no predefined meaning or purpose, but argued that this is not a reason for despair. Instead, he said that people are free to create their own meaning through their choices and actions. He expressed this idea in his 1943 book, Being and Nothingness, and in his later works. Albert Camus agreed that life is without inherent meaning, but approached the problem differently. He called the conflict between the human need for meaning and the universe's silence and indifference the absurd. Camus explained this idea in The Myth of Sisyphus, published in 1942. He said that the correct response to this absurd condition is not hopelessness, but acceptance. People should continue to live and act honestly even while knowing that life has no final purpose. This, he said, is an act of defiance that gives life dignity and value without illusion. Nihilism also influenced modern art, literature, and popular culture. Many modernist writers and artists in the early 20th century expressed feelings of meaninglessness, disillusionment, or the disappointment that you feel when you discover that something is not as good as you had expected or thought, and moral uncertainty that reflected nihilistic ideas. For example, works by Franz Kafka, T.S. Eliot, and Samuel Beckett show a world without clear purpose or stable moral values. In visual art, some movements like Dadaism and certain forms of abstract art expressed similar rejection of meaning, order, and traditional beauty. Later, in the second half of the 20th century, postmodern philosophy expanded on some of these themes by questioning all grand narratives, or big stories that claim to explain everything, such as religion, progress, or universal truth. Thinkers like Michel Foucault and Jean-François Lyotard examined how power and knowledge shape what people call truth, showing how beliefs are socially constructed rather than absolute. In today's culture, nihilism often appears in movies, literature, and music that explore themes of emptiness, moral doubt, and the search for meaning. Some people see this as a cultural symptom of a world where traditional values have weakened, and technology and consumerism dominate.